Today we're talking about what to do with all the green tomatoes that are still on your tomato plants when the first frost is in the forecast. You won't want to miss these tips on saving your tomato harvest from the cold. Let's dig in. Welcome to Homegrown, your backyard garden podcast, where we talk about gardening, even if you don't have a backyard of your own. I'm your host, Kathy Rogers, and together we'll explore growing a successful vegetable garden no matter where you live. Yes, winter is on the way. And what does that mean to gardeners? That your plants are going to die. Well, that's a cheery thought, isn't it? I'm sorry. Of course, you might live in a place where it's warm all winter long, and the rest of us are envious. It's hard to pull out your plants at the end of the growing season, I know. And if you're growing tomatoes in your backyard garden, you probably still have some green tomatoes left on your vines, maybe even a lot of green tomatoes. Tomato plants won't survive a frost, not unless you've protected them in some way, so cold weather will mean the end of your tomato harvest. If you're wondering what to do with all those green tomatoes, you'll appreciate the tips I'm sharing today. Tomato plants are frost sensitive and they love hot, sunny weather. The plants cannot survive a frost, so that first frost will be the end of your tomato plants and the end of your tomato harvest. But wait, can you force green tomatoes to turn red on the vine? Is there any way you can save those green tomatoes or use them up somehow? Yes, there is hope. I have 4 ideas for you to try. But first, be sure to go to the podcast description and click the link to get your free copy of my Tomato Tips cheat sheet so you can grow incredible tomatoes. Here's tip number 1. You can cover your tomato plants to protect them from a light frost. Tomato plants can usually survive a light, short frost of less than 4 hours if you give them a little help. Cover the plants with a blanket or sheet overnight and remove it during the day. You can buy a frost blanket specifically for this purpose, or you can repurpose something in your linen closet. The cover will hold the warm air around the plant and keep the cold air away from the foliage and fruit. But a hard frost, where the low temperature reaches 25 degrees Fahrenheit or lower for 4 hours or more, that will certainly spell doom for your tomato plants, even if you've covered them. It's just too much. So how do you know what to do and when? Actually, it's possible to predict a frost with pretty good accuracy, depending on where you live. Not 100% accuracy, of course, but this tip can help you decide whether or not to cover your plants. According to the Old Farmer's Almanac, if you live in the northern or eastern USA and the daytime temperature is over 75 degrees, the nighttime temperature will probably stay above freezing. If you live in the desert Southwest, that magic daytime number is 80 degrees. A cloudy nighttime sky will act as a blanket and will keep your garden warmer than a clear, starry night. A light overnight breeze will keep the air warmer too, although a strong cold wind will blow the warm air away and there will be a higher chance of frost. Gardens that are situated on a slope or on a hilltop are more likely to survive a cold night, since the coldest air settles in the lowest places. Now, on to tip number 2. Can you hurry the ripening process and make your tomatoes turn red? Maybe or maybe not, but you can try, because what have you got to lose, right? You'll need to do this before frost is in the forecast, so there's time for the tomatoes to turn red. They won't turn red overnight. And here is the secret. Stressing your plants slightly can sometimes trick them into ripening more quickly. Try withholding water for an extra day or 2. So instead of watering every 3 days, for instance, wait a 4th or even a 5th before watering again. Yes, I know. Plants don't think, and maybe this sounds all woo-woo and crazy, but this is the only way I can describe the process. Stressing the plant makes the plant think that time is running out and that it better produce some seeds in a hurry. The purpose of a plant, after all, is to produce seeds so that there will be another generation. Its purpose is not to make tomatoes for you to eat, as much as we would like to think so. It's the seeds inside the tomatoes that are the goal. So delaying watering might trick the tomatoes into ripening more quickly. Hopefully this tip of stressing the plants a bit will reduce the number of green tomatoes still on your plants at the end of the season, but you'll probably still have some that aren't ripe yet when the forecast includes a coming frost. So here's tip number 3. When you're out of time and a hard freeze of 28 degrees or lower is predicted, you have to pick those tomatoes or you will lose them. But your green tomatoes can still turn red after picking. So go ahead and pick them and try one of these tricks. Cut your green tomatoes from the plant with about an inch of stem attached and place them in a paper bag with a banana. Bananas give off ethylene gas, which will encourage the tomatoes to ripen. You can use a cardboard box if you have more green tomatoes than you can fit in a paper bag. Or cut the green tomatoes, again leaving an inch of stem attached, and wrap each one in a piece of newspaper, or tissue paper, because really who has newspaper these days, and put them in a single layer in a cool place, such as a garage, an unheated room, or the basement. Or you can pull up the entire plant with the tomatoes still attached and hang it upside down in the garage or another unheated space, but warm enough that it won't freeze. Whichever one you try, check the tomatoes weekly and remove any that have started to change color. You can place those on a warm windowsill indoors to finish ripening. Then leave the rest of the still green tomatoes for another week or 2. More of them will probably change color. Some years I've had tomatoes ripen a month or more after picking. I use the first method of putting them in a cardboard box, and honestly, I don't even add a banana. Just remember to check them regularly. Weekly is best, especially if you do put a banana in the bag or box, because we all know what happens to bananas after a week, right? And finally, tip number 4 is to eat your green tomatoes. First of all, green tomatoes should not be eaten raw. They contain solanine, which can be toxic if consumed in large amounts. Tomatoes that are dark green contain higher levels of solanine than those that are pale green or slightly orange. Tomatoes that have begun to change color, even just slightly, will probably ripen using the methods we just talked about. But if you don't have the space to store all of your unripe tomatoes while they ripen, or if you don't want to wait, you can use green tomatoes in any of these delicious ways. Make fried green tomatoes by dipping sliced tomatoes in cornmeal and frying, or grill them by marinating sliced tomatoes in something spicy or garlicky and then grill them to perfection. You can layer them on burgers, add them to a salad, or eat them as a side dish. Or you can sauté green tomatoes and add them to a salad. Make green tomato salsa, green tomato enchilada sauce, and many other dishes. I'm told that green tomato ketchup is delicious. Just be sure that you cook them before eating. You can even freeze sliced green tomatoes by placing them in a single layer on parchment paper-lined cookie sheets. Put the cookie sheets in the freezer for several hours, and then remove the frozen slices, put them in labeled freezer bags, and return them to the freezer. Now, you can use your favorite fried green tomato recipe any time of the year. But remember, you have to cook them before eating. Okay, maybe you're just done with your garden at this point, and you're okay with letting your tomato plants die from the frost. And that's okay too. I've been there. Some years I just don't have the time or the energy or the desire. But it can be worth the trouble of ripening and using green tomatoes. If you're the type that wants to make the most of your garden, there are good reasons to put in the effort. Tomatoes are a very healthy food, containing vitamins, minerals, and lycopene in high amounts. Lycopene is an antioxidant that may reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease, cancer, and eye diseases. Ripe tomatoes are a better source of nutrients, but green tomatoes still have health benefits too. One serving of green tomatoes is rich in antioxidants and vitamin C, protein and fiber, and has about 42 calories. If you've grown your tomato plants from seedlings, and maybe even from seeds, and nursed them through the summer heat and watered them daily, it can be hard to say goodbye. Ripening the last of your tomatoes indoors or using them green is certainly worth the time and the effort. You don't have to let the last tomatoes of the season go to waste. I'll recap the tips in a minute, but I wanted to let you know that just as our gardens go dormant over the winter, unless you live in a warm all-year-round location, the podcast is also going to be taking the winter off. This is the last episode of Season 1, but we'll be back in a few months for Season 2. Now, let's recap your choices when it comes to all those green tomatoes on your plants at the end of the growing season. Tip number 1. Cover your tomato plants with a blanket or sheet when you're expecting a light frost. Tip number 2. You'll need to start this one well before the expected date of your first frost. Try stressing your plants a bit so that tomatoes will hurry up and change color. Tip number 3. Now you've run out of time, and your weather forecast says you are going to have a hard freeze tonight. You need to pick those green tomatoes or lose them, but now you know how to ripen them after they've been picked. And tip number 4 is to eat those green tomatoes. Just don't eat them raw. But there are many ways you can cook and eat green tomatoes and keep that harvest going a little bit longer. Choose one of these tips or use them all, and I hope that these suggestions will help you get the most out of the tomato plants in your homegrown backyard garden. Don't forget to get your free tomato tips cheat sheet by going to the description and clicking the link, or go to bit.ly/tomato cheat sheet. That's all one word, so you can grow incredible tomatoes. Be sure to subscribe so you won't miss a single episode. As always, you'll find the link to the transcript of this episode with all of today's tips and the link to get your free tomato tips cheat sheet in the description. Let's keep in touch. You'll find me at my website, oakhillhomestead.com, on Facebook at Oak Hill Homestead, and on Instagram at Oak Hill Homestead. Thank you for tuning in today, and I'll see you here next time for Season 2 of Homegrown, Your Backyard Garden podcast.